I was I was a Fulbright Fellow at the end of the 60s, from 68 to 70, doing research on what was called political theology. And in the midst of that, I realized that though politics is extraordinarily important for the Bible and for Christian theology, economy is really the issue for our time and for our future. So I shifted my focus, not completely away from politics, because what we should be thinking about is what used to be called political economy. So my research since then has been in that area, and my research tries to critically retrieve what the scriptures mean by economy and what the tradition means by economy. Because up until modernity, up until the end of the 17th century, economy was at the heart of Christian theology. Not what we call modern economics. That's a science that began in the 18th century with Adam Smith and others, who was writing at the same time John Wesley was writing. Economics is a modern science. It studies the supply and demand theories, the flow of capital, etc. But economy is an ancient word that is found throughout antiquity and in the Bible. The Greek word is oikonomia. It comes from two words, oikos, which means house or home, and nomos, which means law. So economy in the ancient sense is the law or the management of the household. And it had only one really basic concern, which I think is the concern of what the scriptures call a steward. The question of economy was, and I think should be, from a Christian perspective, will everyone in the household get what it takes to live, to survive the day? That's the concern of economy. That's not the concern of contemporary economics as a discipline or a science, but from the Christian perspective, that is the basic question.
Will everyone in the house get what it takes to survive? And so if that is the basic question of the household, what then, I'm asking you to kind of put it together, what does that mean for the church then?
Well, the church, the oldest term for the church in the scripture is the household of Jesus Christ. Whenever you hear the word household in the scripture, Old or New Testament, think economy. Not in the modern sense of economics, but in the ancient sense that I just talked about. So I try to think of the church as an economy. It's what I call a non-economic economy. That is, an economy that does not work according to the modern notions of economics, but works according to grace, the law of grace. That's the economy of the church. So I think for the future of the church, and maybe even for your legacy campaign, it's good to regain the sense of the church as an economy.
Yeah, in the ancient sense. That's really important for us. And even as we think about our place, going back to our previous discussions and how we then fit into the economy of Middle Tennessee and what that looks like. But we won't go there yet. Actually, we are kind of going there in the context that I've heard you talk a lot about poverty as well, and that poverty is the primary issue of the church in the world and the intersection of the church in the world. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think in the scriptures, poverty is the main question of redemption. When Jesus goes to his hometown church and preaches his first sermon in his hometown church, he reads from Isaiah 61 and says, this is an introduction of what his whole ministry is about. I've been anointed. That means sent or commissioned. It also means Messiah. The word Messiah means anointed. I've been anointed to preach good news to the poor. And I think that's the fundamental theme of redemption in all of the Gospels. But the Bible thinks of poverty in a much different way than we do. I think the church in our time has to work day in and day out against our hatred of the poor and our fear of poverty. The biblical understanding of poverty has at least 5 dimensions to it. The first one is what we might call the dimension of economy. And the cry for salvation or redemption in that dimension is, I'm hungry. And the answer given is, God is bread. So I've tried to show in a couple of books that the Bible tells the story of God by telling the story of bread, beginning in Genesis 47, where a new famine comes and we go to Joseph, who now has become the chief economist of Pharaoh. We say we're starving, and Joseph says, no problem, I will sell bread for your money. But then we come back and say, we and our children are starving, but we have no money. So he says, well, I'll exchange bread for your plows and your oxen. And then we come back and we say, we have no money, we have no plows and oxen, but we're starving. And Joseph says, well, I will exchange bread for your land. And finally we come back and have nothing. And Joseph says, I will exchange bread for the only thing you have left. And then that ominous sentence in Genesis 47 comes, from one end of Egypt to the other, the land became Pharaoh's, the people became Pharaoh's. So we went into slavery because of bread, a certain kind of bread, commodity bread, Pharaoh's storehouse bread. The next part of that story is that we're freed from slavery. We get into the desert and cry, thank God, free at last. But then the first thing we start doing is complaining. And the church has been complaining ever since. Why did you bring us out into the desert to die of starvation? Why did you bring us out to die of thirst? So at that point, God has to decide whether there's going to be a different kind of bread and a different kind of water. So bread and water become absolutely central to who we are as the people of God. And so God creates a different kind of bread. It's called manna. It means what's it in Hebrew, because the people didn't know what it was. But it was sustenance for life. It was a new bread and had to be distributed according to a different kind of logic. Not the logic of quid pro quo, the exchange, because this is a gift. And it cannot be stored up. It cannot be bought and sold. It can't be stolen. You can't steal a gift. And the logic is each gathered according to what he or she needed for life. That's the first dimension of poverty. The second is political. The cry is, I have no power. I have no power to shape my life and the life of my family. And the answer is, God is power. A very different kind of power than the world offers. It's the power that we see in the shape of the cross. According to 1 Corinthians 1, Paul says very simply, the power of God is the cross of Christ. That may be the hardest thing that Christians have to convey to the political economy in which we live. But it was John Wesley's main theme. The order of love is what we live for. The third dimension of poverty is cultural. And the cry there is, I have no name. My story has been stolen. And the answer is, God is name. Redemption means that God gives us a new name, and because we have a name, we have a story to tell. Because we have a story, we have a future. The fourth dimension is bodily. And that the cry there is, I'm sick, I'm not whole. And the answer the Bible gives is God is salus. That's the Latin word from which we get salvation. It simply means health or healing. God is healing. But this is not just for human beings. Nature cries out too. Rather, it doesn't cry the same way we do. Rachel Carson says the only way nature can protest against repression is by dying. And the fifth area, dimension of poverty, is hopelessness. The cry here is, I have no hope. The future is not open. All of us have experienced that in terms of depression at one time or another. And the answer is God gives us hope. God is hope. So I think it's very important for us to understand poverty in a dimensional sense. Each one of us has been poor at one time or another in one or two, or maybe more of these dimensions. And it's clear that if you and your family are poor in one or two, maybe even just one of these dimensions over 2 generations, you're likely to be poor in the other dimensions as well. So understanding poverty in this dimensional way, I think the church fathers, like Gregory of Nazianzus, were clear that all of us are poor. And that would be the starting point for our being able to identify with the poor and be able to bring these 5 dimensions together and dealing with poverty and living with the poor.
I remember the first time that I heard the 5 dimensions of poverty, and I grabbed a hold of cultural poverty in a way that I was like, if I want to change any poverty, I want to change cultural poverty. And in some ways, it's basically been a springboard for me for lots of different things. And current even, this event and Wednesday night programs is really about sharing stories and addressing cultural poverty of this, I don't have a name, and God gives you a name as a child of God to help people create spiritual practices.